John Opie is another one to consider, considering he painted another famous British authoress, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. John was born in 1761 and lived until 1801, and was known as the Cornish Wonder. So he is a possibility. Let's examine Delacroix, a lithographer who illustrated volumes of Shakespeare, Scott, and Goethe, but later specialized in scenes from the battlefield. He's got that book illustrator connection, but he didn't start painting until around 1815, so we're cutting it quite close. Besides, it was French, so let's cross him off the list of candidates. François-Henri Moulard was also French, and he lived from 1769 to 1850, but he has such a lovely painting of a woman in Regency dress, painted in 1810, that I just had to include him. Wouldn't we love to have seen Jane painted in this manner? The next artist who comes to mind is Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, born in 1780 to a father who specialized in miniatures. Remember the miniatures from Persuasion and Pride and Prejudice? Ingres was a neoclassical painter. He studied in Paris with Jacques-Louis David and lived during Napoleon's time, a time when Napoleon's conquests had filled the Louvre Museum with a treasure trove of artistic masterpieces. Ingres was able to study the works of these classical masters and freely borrowed from their styles and subjects. He was known to use elongated figures, such as Le Grand Odalisque, painted in 1814. Somehow, I don't think even Jane would have been progressive enough to pose in this manner. Ingres was criticized by those who believed he was looking too much to the past for his artistic inspiration. Disgraced from the Grand Salon of 1806, he left Paris. He was forced to earn a living drawing sketches and, hearkening back to what his father had done for a living, painting miniatures of tourists. As a former painter whose works had been exhibited in the Grand Salon, this was very degrading to him. These tourists were in large part English tourists traveling through Rome. The only problem is, poor Jane never made it to Rome. We have the right time period, the right genre, but the locations don't match. I think he would have made a fine illustrator for Jane's novels, but as far as I can tell, he and Austen were never introduced. Before we cross Ingres off our list, let's follow his lead. As he borrowed from the works of other artists, I have borrowed from one of his drawings. His original work was done in 1804 and is in the Louvre. Notice the small faces in relation to the size of the elongated bodies. While his is entitled The Harvey Sisters, I will entitle my sketch The Dashwood Sisters. In eliminating most of these talented artists, I seem to be running out of leads for a suitable match for Jane's potential portrait artist. Then I decided on a whim to look up John Constable. I remembered him from my art history studies, but knew he, like Turner, was most famous for his landscapes, including the Hay Wain, which was painted in 1821. I always remembered that Hay Wain called the Constable. I was fairly sure Constable had not dabbled in portraiture. Well, I was wrong. Very wrong. He was an English romantic painter, as Jane was a romantic English author. He painted Dedham Vale in Suffolk, the area surrounding his home, now known as Constable Country, and was said to have claimed, "I should paint my own places best." Does that remind you of someone who illustrated with words the world she knew best? Constable wrote to his friend John Fisher in 1821 and said, "Painting is but another word for feeling." He had the heart of a poet like Captain Benwick, and like Captain Benwick read a great deal of poetry and sermons, and was regarded as a rather articulate artist. Like Jane, he also had an older brother who was disabled, and like Jane's novels, he had his own romantic love story filled with twists and turns. See if any of these plots sound familiar. By 1809, John had fallen in love with a girl from his childhood, Maria Bicknell, but the dissimilarities in their social class threatened to keep them apart. Maria stood to stand to land an inheritance from her grandfather, who threatened to revoke it should she continue her engagement to John. Does that sound like Mrs. Ferrars or what? John's parents approved the match, but didn't have the means to provide a living for their son, so he took up portraiture, which he found dull work, though he executed many fine portraits. His parents soon died in quick succession, leaving John with 1/5 of the family business. Financially secure, John married Maria in 1816. The couple toured Weymouth and Brighton. Oh, I should love to go to Brighton. Which, along with his happiness, inspired a new development in John's painting career, and thus he had his happily ever after. Alas, our Jane did not. However, I am sure his life and love for Maria would have made excellent fodder for an Austen novel. John was meticulous in his work, and Jane has said, "An artist cannot do anything slovenly." If only the twain had met. Here is a self-portrait sketch of Constable, and here is one based on that sketch. I shall call it Mr. Darcy. All right, I can't help it. I've fallen for the star-crossed lover story of John Constable. As soon as quantum physics gives the green light to time travel, I shall send word back to Mr. Constable to travel directly to Miss Austen.